We're gonna go live. We're up, so your phones need to be zipped up like normal. Let's put them all the way away so I can get you introduced to this concept, at least this pre-test thing that I am looking for. Up. And then zip up your phone and then for a second, zip up your phone. Selena. Thank you. Very brief. Okay, so cool. So what I have you guys doing to start off, Photoshop is an extremely powerful tool for graphic design, for photography, for concept art, environment design, game planning, game production. There's all types of industries that use Photoshop. Thankfully, Photoshop and Illustrator sort of operate under the same kind of general skills and executions, right? Like if you think about riding a bike, there's tons of different terrains that you can ride bikes on. You can mountain bike up and down through the city, right, over flat lanes. Those are all different use cases, but it's all the same sort of motion. And Photoshop and Illustrator work the same way by kind of using the same sort of bag of tricks, I guess we'll call it. And one of those bags of tricks, which is what you'll be practicing here with your duck horse challenge. So if we look at our thread, which I need to connect to the modules real quick. Where is it? Sorry, I got too many tabs open. Let me pull it up real quick. Okay, on your thread, there's the assignment 8.1, which we'll spend about 20-ish minutes doing. I just want to get you set up today. I'm trying something color coding with the different blocks. So you guys are blue, so Tuesday, May 1st, or Tuesday, first period. This is due tonight at midnight, so you'll have all the block day to do it. It shouldn't take you too long because you guys are just attempting. And we'll go into later today how you should go about this process. So what is the actual process that I'm actually asking you to go about here? I want you to use Photoshop to attempt to complete this activity without any instruction. That just means I can't tell you how to do it yet, but you can research. You can Google like how to combine, how to cut out, how to do different things in Photoshop if that's something that interests you in order to complete this assignment. And your end goal should look something like this, okay? We're taking two images, which you can find here with the horse and the duck, and you're trying to combine them in any way that could work. So because this is a pretest, it's not graded on the quality of your work. It's not graded on how effectively you use your time or how detailed your end product is. It's just for me and Mr. Hendricks to see where your guys' skills are already at so we can build upon those. So your objective is to take these images, which you can right click and save image as, which then you can put in its own folder. That's sixth period, first period. We'll call this assignment, oops, my caps lock is on. Assignment 8.1. And then you can just leave the default file name as there is. We're gonna click save, right click, save image as, save again. And then if we go into our files, we're gonna have two nice JPEGs ready to go of the horse and the duck. So I'll show you how to bring them into Photoshop, but after that, the time is yours. I'll put a 20-minute timer on the clock. You have that full length of time before I go into the details on how to create this end product like this. So with Photoshop, you'll probably, if you try to open it on your PC, it'll probably ask you to sign out of an old Adobe computer because our plan limits us to, I think, 4 PCs, 4 total. You just want to, anyone that says SK, that's a Skyline one. So if you have it on your home computer and you want to up your computer number, sign out of one that says SK because those are all going to be in class. Okay. There's a Photoshop update recently, so we'll just ignore that for now. You can see some of my other, this is where my YouTube thumbnails come out of. We're going to go new file, and it's going to pop up with this dialog box here. We're going to leave it, where's the Photoshop default? There we go. Leave it as the default Photoshop size, which should be 5 by 7 inches, 300 PPI. Now we're going to click create. Okay, we won't get in too much detail. You want to be in the workspace essentials, just like an Illustrator. Check and make sure your tools are similar to mine. But to get your images into Photoshop, there's 2 ways you can do that. You can either click and drag. Let me actually put this here. You can click and drag and it will copy it, give it its best attempts to get the image on there. And then you can click and drag another one. If you do not see these handles on your bounding box, you don't see these blue lines, you want to press Control-T. If Control-T does not work, then I can check your individual PC. But to get these images into Photoshop, the rest of this is up to you. You have your tools on the side, just like Illustrator. You have your menus on the top bar, just like Illustrator. They're both Adobe products, so they're going to have similar types of layouts in order to combine these two images into this final product here. Oops, that didn't work. So I'm going to put a 20-minute timer on the board. At the end of the 20 minutes, I'll show you how to do this, but I just want to see how far you guys can get by yourselves. And remember, this is graded on completion. It's not graded on quality. Okay? Sound good? Okay, so I'm going to close the Zoom room for now. There'll be another one after the 20 minutes, and then we'll go over some more about what Photoshop is and what it's used for. Okay, cool. I'll let you guys get started. To complete this duck horse challenge, what you guys have attempted here is something called compositing. If you think about that word composite, like a composite material, it means made up of other things, right? Or a musical composition is composed of different instruments. That is one of those bicycle riding skills, type skills that I mentioned earlier at the start of the day that you're going to be using very consistently with Photoshop. And compositing takes advantage of something called masks. So if you look right here, this is Mr. Hendricks and I's work. You can see that we have very little layers happening, and there's some interesting stuff going on with the little thumbnails here. Same thing like on Illustrator, it's going to have a little preview of what lives on that layer. Okay, I'm going to show you how I would have approached this assignment. So if we go back to Photoshop, and we will get more into detail on something called masking here in a second, because masking is one of the key features that you use not only in Photoshop, but in a lot of different visual art type apps. So Premiere Pro uses masking, After Effects uses masking, DaVinci Resolve, Blender, Maya, Unity, all these different apps that create all these different type of visual things are using some concept of masking. So if I create a new file, just the default Photoshop size, you can see right here, I've got a layers panel in the corner and the background says that it's locked. Photoshop, which we'll get into more in a second, is known as a destructive editor. When you edit pixels on Photoshop, when you edit these rasters, remember all the way back to the start of the class, when you edit these rasters, you are permanently changing their data. And if you save it that way, it can't go back and undo it like you can in Lightroom or in Illustrator with vectors. So what we're doing here with that in mind is I'm actually going to open up that image that I saved. I'm going to start with the horse because the horse is my background. I'm looking at my example here. A majority of this image is the horse. So we're going to set that as our background. So if I go into my graphic design folder for, where's 8.1? There it is. Okay, I'm going to start with the horse JPEG and I'm just going to click open. And what that's going to do is bring this photo into my workspace here, but it's locked as the background layer. I can't make any changes because it's going to say this is a background. You can't move it without unlocking it or converting it to a normal layer. That's fine. That's not actually what I want to do. I want to leave this background locked as is for now. Okay. Then I'm going to take my duck or the other image that I'm trying to composite. It can be any number of images you're trying to composite together. And I'm just going to place that in my workspace here. You can see it's going to add it as a new layer, but it's not locked. It's got the original file name without the extension. It's not locked, and I can move it around freely as I see fit. Okay. What I want to do, and I saw some students doing this, is I want to try to line up my photos. It comes with practice as well. You'll get an eye for it, but you want to line up your photos so they're about the same pose. A lot of Photoshop is making your life easier, okay? You want to spend as little time as possible, right? I keep saying as graphic designers, we're not lazy, we are efficient, okay? You want to line up your reference pictures in at least some type of similar manner. Okay, I'm going to hit enter. Photoshop gets a little annoyed if you don't do something called committing a change. So if I were to still be moving this image around, or transforming it, for example, let's do another rotation. If it has this this X across it, it's not going to want to do other things. Like if I click on file, most of these options are grayed out. To commit my change, make sure it's in the right spot, I usually have to hit enter, or I have to hit escape, or click on some type of other thing here. Okay, so moving back at our layers panel, there's a couple different tools here that don't really have a lot of explanation besides their little picture. I am just going to look at this opacity slider right here. Opacity is the amount of opaqueness or see-throughness that something has. And if it's 100% opaque, no light is going to pass through. We set that to about 30 is a little low. Let's try 60% opaque. Now I can kind of sort of see how I can line up these two examples with one another. Maybe make it a little bit larger. Photoshop, you do not have to hold shift to make something scale evenly. In fact, you actually do the opposite. If I'm just clicking and dragging, it's going to resize evenly. But if I hold shift, it's going to start squashing and messing with all my stuff. Photoshop is designed more as a photo editing application than it is a visual illustration application like Illustrator. So I want to just line these two up kind of as close as I can get them here. That looks pretty good. I'm going to turn my opacity back up and then hit enter. And now I'm going to go about creating a mask. So a mask is just like the term that you put over your face, right? It's going to have another layer in front of your face with some parts of it shining through, like your eyes or your nose, and other parts covered up by the actual mask itself. I'm going to create a mask here that shows an example. What's that doing that? It's going to have the duck portion become like the mask that I would put over the horse's face. So in order to do that, I need to make a sort of cutout, kind of like a collage if I'm stacking up paper together. I need to make a cutout of this duck's head right here, only the part that I want to show through. And the tool that I would use, if you click and hold on this magic wand, is this object or this quick selection tool. What the quick selection tool does, and it has to be on an unlocked layer, if you use your bracket keys, which are right next to the backspace key, same one that make your brushes bigger or smaller in Illustrator, make your brushes bigger or smaller in Photoshop. The cool part about the quick selection tool is if I just click in this white feathered space right here, watch what happens. It's going to make a guess based on the pixels around it, based on the information that is provided here, about what I want to look at. Okay? The term for this line right here is called a line of marching ants. Okay? Because it looks like the ants are marching around the edge, right? You can also call it a selection line, a dotted line, but the official term is the line of marching ants. But you can see right here, it's making a, let me turn on my pointer. It's making a hard edge between, doesn't want to stay up for some reason, a hard edge between the white pixels of the feathers and the yellow pixels of the beak. That's how the quick selection tool works. It looks for differences. It looks for high amounts of contrast, and it's going to plot some type of line. So what I can do here, the one click selected this head. I can do another click in the yellow, and it's going to guess, okay, cool. You want me to focus on the yellow pixels this time. I'm going to look for contrast between the yellow and the surrounding area, which would be the blurry green background. Okay. So I'm going to click a little bit more down the neck. I want a little bit more of the duck's kind of neck and chest in there. Okay. Turn this off. Zoom out. Now you can see I've got a line of marching ants, which looks a lot like the dotted line that you cut things in like kindergarten, right? It's very similar when you're looking at it in Photoshop. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on this little button right down here. This white rectangle with the black circle on it. You can see when you hover over, it says layer masks. Watch what happens to my layers when I click that button. Okay, look right here. When I click that button, it's going to create, let me see if I can make these thumbnails bigger actually. Yeah, we'll keep it larger. Okay, if you look here, there is a white outline on a black background that is vaguely in the shape that I made the cutout of. Okay, that is how a mask happens. White and black are very important colors in the masking process because instead of acting like colors, they're actually an amount of lightness or amount of see-throughness. Okay, So if I move this around, you'll notice that I don't have that bounding box anymore. It's hard for me to resize. I want to hit Control T, and that should bring my, why did that not bring up my transform option? Hold on. Okay, it's not doing what I need to. That's okay. Because I figured out the reason I can't see it is because they're all the way out here. Okay, this is still the full duck image. You can see that if I turn off my layer mask by shift clicking on it, all of that data is still there. I have just chosen a specific amount of it to keep. So if I ever need to resize it, I have that whole space to work with here. Okay, so we're going to do this. Do a little bit of adjusting. Okay. You don't have to blend them together. You just have to get them pretty close. Okay. I don't want to mess around with a lot of the details on the horse's face here. So I am just going to cover it up. Just going to put a little bandage on there. Okay. Do a little bit of resizing. Maybe make it a little bit wider by holding shift because I want it to cover up a little bit here. And then I'm noticing, if I zoom in here, there's an overlap. Oh, okay. We're slowing down a little bit. There's some overlap between the duck's neck and the horse's sort of chest right here. I can take my paintbrush tool, set to black, because black in a mask acts like the actual part that covers up. Okay. The old term is black conceals and white reveals, but I'm not a huge fan of that distinction. So what I'm going to do is click very gently, dragging and kind of shaping with my black colored brush here. And you'll notice it doesn't actually paint with black. It creates sort of a see-through portion, a more opaque portion that lines up with my my shape here. Okay, so this is my quick demo. This is how I want you guys to go about cutting things out as we go into more detail on how masks work. All right, because I still have all of this data, if I ever need it, going around the Photoshop destruction pattern. I can still keep that in case I need. So then I'm going to go File, Export. Quick export as PNG is what I usually do, but you can also export as. This is very similar to your export for screens. I noticed you guys doing that as I was walking around. Here's your example here. Let me shrink this down a little bit. Okay, it's going to be called Horse 1. It's going to ask where you want to save it here in a second. You got a couple different formats from PNG, JPEG to GIF. Click export, and it's going to ask where you want it to go. These are all my YouTube thumbnails because this is where I'm usually exporting stuff. But if I go here to not Zoom recordings, your graphic design folder 8.1, click save. It's going to think for a second. And then I have a new horse1.png, which is a beautiful duck horse hybrid. So what I want you guys to do now is try this again. But instead of trying to, if you already did a mask, then congratulations. You don't need to do anything else for now. But I want you guys to give this another try. Try focusing on using masks and as few layers as possible. Okay? And that'll be your second attempt. Does that make sense? Sweet. All right. Good luck. We'll go about 10 minutes this time. We're not recording. Now we are. Okay. So with vectors being an expression of the data on the page, Photoshop is what's known as a bitmap software or a raster-based software. I believe, if I remember correctly, raster in English should be the word grid. It's a German word. Scan pattern. Yeah, okay. Anyway, the way raster works for our purposes, our working definition, is that rasters create something called a bitmap. If we break down that word bitmap, a map of bits, okay? Bits are what turn into data, okay? 8 bits to a byte. You think back to 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit video games from the nostalgia kind of terms. There's 8 bits to a byte, 8 bytes to a kilobyte, megabyte, gigabyte, terabyte, goes all the way up. That is how data is stored. So with a bit map, what you are doing is creating an exact map of what bit should have what data, okay? Bits are also known as pixels. You've got pixels on your screen that relate to the bitmap of the pixels underneath, and you tell these specific pixels to change to specific colors. Right now, these pixels are set to green. There's a couple different white in here, some other levels of green, black, white, blue, purple, different types of stuff on my toolbar, right? All of those are very specific instructions provided by something called a bitmap so that my screen can correctly display what I'm trying to do here. So since Photoshop is a bitmap software, it means the resolution and the size of the image is very important. And you will notice pixels when you zoom in. You also notice that brushes and colors will look a lot more organic compared to the really clean sort of digital look of Illustrator. Okay, so this week we're focused on the basic functions of Photoshop, and then next week we'll get into some more advanced compositing techniques and some ways to create some cool visual effects. Okay, these are your kind of main takeaways that Hendrix and I are focusing on for Photoshop. Masking and blending are big ones. That's what we're starting to practice now. We'll get more into shadows and detail later. Different stuff with layer styles and then blend modes are all going to be, these are your bicycle skills, okay? You can take these bicycle skills not only to different aspects of Photoshop, more specific aspects of Photoshop, but you can take these concepts and apply them to a ton of other different, not only Adobe products, but other visually creative applications that we're working with in today's day and age. Okay, so why is it important that you guys know Photoshop? It's an industry standard. As much as there are competitors on the market, the industry is still very much in an Adobe sphere. So I'm sure you're aware, Illustrator and Photoshop have their frustrations. They have things about them that kind of suck to do. But knowing how they work and knowing how to apply the concepts is an industry standard that will take you far if you decide to go into more graphic design. Okay, there are strengths and weaknesses to each Photoshop and Illustrator, and there are parts of the toolbox of skills that are needed to make complete designs we'll cover here. Knowing when to use Photoshop or Illustrator, and the big difference between raster images and vector images. We can look at the example here. Here's a map of the bits. This map is telling all of these bits right here to be blue, these bits to be kind of an icy blue, the sky blue. These bits have the shadow with a little bit of opacity. These bits are yellow. Okay, this is a map. These are instructions on how to create this image. This coordinate here, curve point here, coordinate here, fill the data in with blue. Okay, coordinate here, curve point here, coordinate here. This is an expression. This is an image. Okay, this is a mathematical function. This is more like a painting, where it's actually input on screen to in order to make something happen. Okay, there's a couple different file formats that will help you understand which file type you're working with if you've never seen it before. Ones you've seen for rasters are going to be PNG and JPEG, your typical photographic type images, as well as GIF or bitmap, BMP. And then there's vector images. We know AI is an Illustrator RAW. And EPS is not one I use very frequently. It's an encapsulated postscript. SVG is kind of the general term for an AI file. A lot of different programs like Inkscape or what are some other vector programs? Krita, Procreate's not vector. Anyway, the affinity programs, they will typically take an EPS or an SVG, scalable vector graphic. And then you've heard of PDF. PDFs are actually vectors. So when you send something to the printer or save it to, you go to print something and you save it to your desktop, you're actually saving it as a vector. So you can scale that up or down to any infinite size because it converts it to a set of anchor points and curves instead of a map of the bits. Okay? It's only when saved from vector programs. So if you save something from Illustrator, if you open a PDF in Illustrator that's paper and then save it, it will be a vector. Okay. We're covering both Photoshop and Illustrator because these two work together very, very well. They butt heads sometimes, but they do work together very, very well. This is an example of a design that Mr. Hendrix started in Illustrator and brought over to Photoshop. And the way that I was taught these two programs is that Illustrator is typically reserved for obviously illustrations, but also creating something called an asset, okay? Each of these little designs here, each of these little shapes that you see here, okay? Some of the basic sort of shapes like here, maybe some of these low opacity circles, some of these outlines. Those are pieces, those are assets created by Illustrator in order to bring into Photoshop to compose, create a composition into a fully formed poster. The two work together, okay? Illustrator is really bad at creating print media typically. Not really bad, but it's not its greatest strength. Illustrator really succeeds in the digital sphere. Photoshop is way better at making things that you'll hold, physical media, things that get printed, things that get stuck up, things that get, printed on t-shirts perhaps. Wink, wink. But not all of this stuff is possible in Photoshop, so that's why you create your assets in Illustrator, bring them over to Photoshop, combine the powers of the two of them to create a really interesting composition such as this one. So this week we're going to be mostly focused on masking and blending. We might get a little bit into shadows and detail. And then next week we'll get into some more intermediate skills like layer styles and blend modes. And then at that point, we're going to be pretty close to the end of the year and pretty close into finals and shirt creation, mug creation, sticker creation territory. Okay, you'll get to combine all the things you've learned as well as the stuff you'll pick up with Photoshop to make some pretty sweet swag that you can show off to all your friends and family. So this is just kind of the preview that Hendrix and I have come up with, going over what Photoshop is used for, and you'll see it more and more as the days progress. So thank you guys for bearing with this process. I really appreciate you listening today. I talked more than I planned, so thank you guys for bearing with it. I'll process your Zoom room here shortly. You got Flex in 10 minutes, and be patient with yourself. These programs are not easy to learn. Parts of them come easily, parts of them come harder, or more difficult, with more difficulty. But still, cut yourself some slack. Be generous with what you are learning and trust the process. Cool. Thank you guys for listening.